Welcome to the Duckpin Podcast with your host, Brian Griffiths. And now, here's Brian.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another new episode of the Duckpin Podcast. I am your host, Brian Griffiths. My guest on this week's show is the nominee of the American Solidarity Party for President of the United States in this year's election, Mr. Brian Carroll. Don't go away. Join us on this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast. Our guest on this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast is our first presidential candidate that we are having on the podcast. And just for this disclaimer purposes, this show is going to air on Wednesday, September the 16th. And I am not only voting for this gentleman as our next president of the United States, but I will also be endorsing him in my column in the Annapolis Capital later this week as well. Joining us today, the presidential candidate of the American Solidarity Party, Mr. Brian Carroll. Brian, it's great to see you this evening.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on. So with that disclaimer out of the way, tell folks a little bit about your background. You're a teacher. You've run for office before. So tell people a little bit about who you are and kind of what makes you tick.
Well, I'm a Californian with the exception of 9 years that I lived in Colombia. And is that phone messing us up?
I can't hear it now, so you're good.
Okay. I lived 9 years in Colombia, 1 year in Colorado, but the rest of my life has all been in California. Central California is where I live now. And been a teacher all my life, 40 years, most of it in junior high, most of it also in public schools, with the exception of the time I was in Colombia. I was teaching missionary kids. And I've also traveled a great deal in Europe and in Asia. And my subject has been history. Taught a lot of kids Constitution, and I'm especially pleased that many of those students right now are going to be electors for me in the different states. As we register in different states, you have to put in a list of who's going to be your electors. And so a lot of those former students are electors. Married, 5 kids, 14 grandkids, and life is going great for me.
Well, that's very good. You ran for Congress in 2018 in California. For a lot of people who may not be familiar with California politics, California is a very different electoral system than it is in a lot of the states. Where everybody runs in one party primary in June and the top 2 candidates go to the general election. But you were able to successfully get 1% of the vote in that primary in 2018 running for Congress. What was that kind of like? How hard was that to break through to get that 1% even in a congressional race? And how much of that congressional race influenced your decision to ultimately run for president?
I actually got 1.4%, and I beat the Libertarian who was in the race. In the California primary, all the candidates, no matter what party you're in, are on one list in the primary, and the top 2 move on. And I finished 5th out of the 6. And I had gotten into it. We were trying to start a party. I walked away from the Republican Party in 2016. And we organized the American Solidarity Party in California. And once you organize a party, then you got to have somebody run for something. So I kind of looked around and said, what can I run for? And Devin Nunes was my congressman. And I felt like he was becoming more and more of an embarrassment in Washington. So he was an obvious target. And as I ran for that, I was still teaching full time, which meant I had very little time. I had really no team. Most of our members are either Northern California or Southern California. So in this particular area, I was all by myself. Didn't have time or money or team, but I still had fun. I got involved in some of the forums that candidates get invited to, and I walked in a couple of parades. And by the time it was over, I realized that I had as much or more electoral experience, candidate experience, than anybody else in the party nationally. and I could see the writing on the wall that I would probably be a leading candidate to be the president. And I had about a year to pray about that. And I had some objections, and one at a time, God kicked those objections out of the way. And so by the time I had to make a decision, I was comfortable making the decision.
Let's talk a little bit about you're joining the American Solidarity Party. You say you left the Republican Party after 2016. I think you're not the only one. I've stayed so far, but every day I question. You went to the American Solidarity Party. Now, a lot of people are not familiar with the American Solidarity Party. I had the opportunity 4 years ago to also interview Mike Maturin, who was the 2016 nominee. But for folks who may not be familiar with the American Solidarity Party, talk a little bit about what the party stands for and how it differs from the two major establishment parties.
Well, we have some overlap with the other parties. We are more pro-life than the Republicans, but we also don't like to see kids in cages at the border and families separated. We're very family-oriented. And so we want to see a government that is merciful and respectful of people. And a lot of the programs that we consider might be more at home in the Democratic Party, but we are absolutely 100% pro-life for the whole life, not just to see the baby born, but we want to see society do what it can help, or to help a mother know that she can be successful raising that child. Most abortions are out of fear, and we want to reduce the fear factor so that a woman in a stressful pregnancy can say, you know what, I think I can do this. I don't need to get an abortion. I can be a successful mother and raise this kid or pass it off to an adoptive family. And so reduce the number of abortions doing it that way.
What has been the biggest challenge running as it's hard to even call the American Solidarity Party even a third party at this point, just because you have the libertarian parties, the green parties, who are much more established in being non-major parties. The ASP is basically starting, from scratch the last, 8 to 10 years or so, in this country. How much of a challenge has that been, trying to get ballot access, navigating the rules when you don't have the level of infrastructure that even the libertarians or the Greens or some of these other third parties have?
Well, when you're at the bottom, you can only go up. Excuse me. Mike Maturin got somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 votes 4 years ago. 4 years before that, our candidate was Joe Schreiner, and I don't know what his count was, but we're growing. There are about 50 parties in the United States, and we've just kind of moved up into the rank of the top 5 or 6. We recently a national writer was looking at the parties, and he narrowed it down to what he felt were the top 6, and then 2 of those he discarded, one because they didn't really have a platform, and the other because the platform was so far off of his Christian audience that nobody in his audience would be interested in it. And so we were one of the 4 parties that he looked at. And we have, unabashedly, I can claim, we have the best platform of any party in the United States. And so having the strength of the platform, that's our biggest strength. And this has been a very weird year for campaigning because of COVID. That has presented both some problems and some blessings. Most candidates get on the ballot by circulating petitions. And this has been a horrible year for circulating petitions. But as a result of that, some of the states actually released or reduced their requirements for petitions. And for instance, we at the beginning of the year had no hope at all of getting onto the ballot in Illinois. They just set the bar too high. But they managed to lower the bar enough that we will be on the ballot in Illinois. And a similar thing happened in Vermont. It was not a state where we thought we had much chance. And yet when they lowered the bar, we were able to qualify there. So in some states, it's made it easier. In other states, it's made it impossible. And so there are some states we will be on, and some states where we will be write-ins, and some where, unfortunately, voters will not have the chance to vote for us.
Do you have a sense at the moment how many states, just based on your current understanding of the data, how many states you're going to actually appear physically on the ballot on? Do you just have a rough estimate of that?
Yeah, we expect to be on the ballot in Colorado, Louisiana, Arkansas, Illinois, Wisconsin, Vermont, and those we've already qualified for. We hope to also qualify in Rhode Island. And then we will be on as write-ins in probably another 30 or so states.
Okay, that's very good. Let's talk a little bit about that, about the platform and kind of the differences between the two parties. As a conservative, small C conservative, grown up in the Republican Party, Reaganite, Goldwater type conservative. Obviously, I'm very comfortable with the ASP platform on life issues. I am 100% pro-life from conception till natural death. Something that, like as you said, the GOP is not even there at this point. I know that some other fellow conservatives will struggle a little bit with some of the bigger government, side of the platform. How do you make that case? Why should a Trump skeptic conservative vote for you and for the American Solidarity Party?
Well, if you look at the kinds of things that we're advocating, many of them do have conservative arguments in their favor. I just pointed out for pro-life, the kinds of things we want to do. Family values are a conservative thing. And we definitely are strong on trying to support and keep families together, build strong families, build strong communities. Those are conservative values. When we support single-payer health care, you can make some really strong conservative arguments for that. Conservatives like to see efficiency. And we have so much duplication in paperwork and tests that get required not for the medical necessity, but because of threat of lawsuits. And estimates are that if we were to go to single payer, we could eliminate $350 billion a year in just paperwork, desk job. Well, we can take that amount of money and take it out of desk work and hire some doctors. That's a conservative argument. And so there are some very good conservative arguments in favor of single-payer healthcare. And I think you can go through our whole platform and find conservative support for every single thing that's there.
Conversely, obviously there's going to be a lot of Biden skeptic Democrats this year, and they may have agree much more vociferously with those other parts of the platform that we just talked about, single payer healthcare and some of those initiatives. But they may have balk at the idea of being 100% pro-life, just get based on the Democratic electorate and how the left views the culture of life. How do you make that case to a Biden skeptic liberal to vote for you?
Well, if you look at the pro-life issue within the Democratic Party, and Democrats for Life for America have been working very hard to point out that there are 21 million Democrats who consider themselves to be pro-life. And when you look at the very narrow position that the official Democratic Party is taking, any abortion at any time for any reason, and taxpayers should pay for it, that's not even a majority position within the Democratic Party. Rank and file, grassroots Democrats, even if they are pro-choice to a degree, they want to see some limits. They don't want to see abortion carried out on pain-capable children. They don't want to see abortion become just a mass routine thing. And so they want to take their party back. When you looked at the original 20 or so Democrats who ran in the primary, every one of them took that extreme position on abortion that most of the Democrats don't really support that position. And so there's a movement within the Democrats to take back their party. And those Democrats might want to vote for us this year just to let the people at the top know that they're not going to go along with the abortion extremism, in the same way that we've got gobs and gobs and gobs of Republicans rebelling against the Trump years of Republican Party, how the Trump has taken over the party. They want to take their party back from Trump. Even your former Republican National Chairman, Steele, and a bunch of them, lots and lots of Republicans are saying, we want to take our party back. And they may vote for us just to see the Trump years over.
Yeah, I think there is a very big silent, in some cases silent, in some cases very loud contingent of Republicans, particularly, who want to take the party back from Trumpism and want to see things change. When people think about running for president and the mechanics of running for president, they think of big staffs and airplanes with logos on them and multi-million-dollar TV commercials. So somebody in your instance running for president, not going to have that sort of thing. What does kind of the campaign apparatus look like for a candidate running on a small party platform, and as the nominee of a small party who's still trying to build their name ID and their voter base up?
Well, I answer my own phones and answer my own email. I'm my own chauffeur. I do have some really excellent people behind me. As we're trying to get officially recognized by the different states and either get on the ballot or recognized as write-in, I've got 4 or 5 people who are just doing incredibly good research. They're telling me what I need to get signed and when I need to get it turned in. I couldn't do it without them. I have my campaign manager, Desmond Silvera, did the same thing for Mike Matern 4 years ago, so he's been through it. He has all that experience. He's priceless. I couldn't do it without him. So I do have a lot of good people. They're spread across the country. We meet by Zoom, and there's still a lot of very small operation. We're trying to do it with a small team of all volunteers. Nobody's getting paid, and that puts the limits on it, but it also makes it more of a challenge and it makes it kind of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like to me it's kind of more of the way it's supposed to be. People who are doing something for the right reason, for the right cause. Which certainly somebody running for president and the way you're doing it, certainly doing it for the right reasons and for the right way. If people want to support you in any way, they can support you. What is the best way for them to do that?
I would suggest several things. One is every single state has a state party Facebook page. So look up American Solidarity Party of Kansas or American Solidarity Party of Massachusetts or whatever, and join the page. And that gets you into the discussion of what's going on. You can join the party. You become a voting member of the party with any contribution. You contribute $1 and you are a voting member. And so anything that comes up for like the platform, we approved a new platform last year. We added a statement of principles this year. And so voting members get to be a part of that. And you can go to my page, briancarroll.life, and there is a contributing button there, and any contributions will be gratefully accepted. But again, that's not our focus. We can be helped more by people simply talking to their friends. Any of the things that are on my Facebook page can be shared easily on Facebook. We have some Twitter, we have the other social media, and just simply share it to your friends. That is the most valuable way of convincing people, introducing people to us, and it's free.
Yeah, it's really nice that that the way you guys have done that, where you've made it very easy to share information about you and about the party. Speaking of support, kind of at the level of, obviously somebody running for president is good, but it also, as you did in 2018, having candidates run for Congress, for Senate, for even local offices. What's kind of the strategy for this year for the ASP as far as like running candidates for Congress and for Senate? Because anytime you have multiple candidates running, it obviously supports the top of the ticket, in this case you. So, are there a lot of people running as American Solidarity candidates up and down the ballot, or is it just kind of more, more of your instance in California where, well, somebody has to run, so somebody did file? What's kind of the outlook for the ASP in other races? That's
one area where we could really benefit from more people willing to run. And we're a family-oriented party, which means we have a lot of members with young kids, and it's very, very difficult to get into politics if you're trying to raise a family. When my kids were small and I kind of thought about running for something, I rejected the idea simply because I didn't want to be away from my kids. I wanted to raise my kids, and now they're all gone. They're all over the world, and they're raising their own families, which gives me the freedom to do that. But I certainly would not recommend the campaign lifestyle, the political lifestyle, for a lot of people with small kids. And we do. Our people are family-oriented people, and I appreciate that and endorse that. We would like to see more candidates. And hopefully, as we become more known, people will say, oh, hey, there's a party that I think I could be a part of. 4 years ago, where Mike Maturin got 6,000 votes in the whole country, we expect to go 10 or 15 times more than that, at least, and maybe more. And that gets us to the point where people start saying, hey, that's a legitimate party. I could run on that platform. And we would have more of the structure to support people. We would love to have, 4 years from now, to have built the status to attract some bigger names. And there's a lot of them out there. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards and State Senator Katrina Jackson. Those are pro-life Democrats that we would love to attract. There's all kinds of Republicans that have left the Republican Party that we would like to attract. And what we want to do this year is establish that we're a legitimate party. We belong in the top echelon, if not the top two, at least in the next echelon, next level of, 2 or 3 or 4 parties that are capable of electing somebody to a city council, to a state legislature, and maybe to Congress.
Yeah, that was going to be my last question for you, was what a successful campaign looks like, but you kind of laid it out right there. 60,000 plus votes and continued, a continued awareness of the American Solidarity brand and laying that groundwork for the future. That sounds like that's what success looks like to you in this election.
Between 60 and 100,000 votes would make us the 5th or 6th biggest party in the country. And we think we can do it. It's achievable. And so my question for you, Brian, is would you be willing to run for office on our platform?
I'm gonna have to talk with management about that. And by management, I mean my wife.
As it should be.
Well, his website is briancarroll.life. You have to love the emphasis there on life, and he is the American Solidarity candidate for President of the United States. He's got my vote. I hope he's got yours too. Brian Carroll, thanks for joining us in this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast.
Thank you, Brian. Have a great evening.
Appreciate it. Many thanks to Brian Carroll for joining me on this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast. We wish him the best of luck going forward during this presidential election cycle. If you were interested in learning more about the Duckpin, please visit our website, theduckpin.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on YouTube. If you are watching the YouTube video, just click subscribe. If you are listening to us, you can listen to us on all the podcast apps, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, all of them. Just search for the Duckpin Podcast. We, of course, are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the Duckpin. And if you want to get in touch with us, it's very easy, theduckpin@gmail.com. If you want to help us out, tell a friend about this podcast. Tell a friend about the Duckpin and spread the word about the Duckpin Podcast and some of the great podcasts that we've already had and some of the podcasts that we're going to be airing in the future. For everybody at the Duckpin, thank you very much for watching this week's episode of the Duckpin Podcast. I'm Brian Griffiths. Good night.
This has been the Duckpin Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and download